And the Punjabi farmers in their thousands marched onto Delhi, and that was the beginning of their mass protests. And since then, they've been camping on the outskirts of Delhi. Yeah, they had built massive structures to stop them reaching Delhi, but they pushed them away just like they were toys. And they were attacked with water cannons. Okay, that was the. I'm now going to show you also showed some slides. Sorry. Can you see the slides? Can you see them? Okay, yeah, sorry, yeah. Yeah, so these are the massive rallies that have been taking place, and these are women organizing meetings, mass rallies, and also they brought together Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims. Here the Sikhs, Hindu, Muslim praying together. But Modi's police didn't spare even the old people, the police attacking an old man. And about a month ago, they blocked railways, people sitting on the railway lines. And most of them blocked the railway lines. And these are the three main camps on the borders of Delhi. There are a couple other smaller ones as well, but these are three different states are joining Delhi. And this is where Delhi is, and it's Punjab. And these are the main states all around which are mostly involved in protests, but other protests have also taken place in other states as well. And shows how the women have been at the forefront. And they also been holding massive rallies in the countryside, away from the borders of Delhi. Often 20, 30 villages get together and they have massive rallies. Here, there were 100,000 people. And this is one of the camps, which goes on for many kilometers. And this shows how they all come together. And well, the police have built massive structures now. These structures stop them going towards Delhi, and also to stop the people from Delhi supplying them with the necessities. And the police have even attacked their camps with the water cannons. So this is what's been going on for the last 4 months. And okay, now I'll stop sharing now. And yes, so in 2 days' time, it'll be exactly 4 months since they've been camping outside Delhi. Exactly 4 months since the video that was taken. So on 26th of March, 2 days' time, to mark the day, they are calling for what they call blocking India. Basically, they want to shut down all the transport, and also they're calling for all the shops to shut down in 2 days' time. And about a month ago, similarly, they had blocked railways for 4 hours. And a month before that, they also blocked roads and railways, roads and highways for 4 or 5 hours. But this time, in 2 days' time, they're calling for a 12-hour stoppage of all transport and also shutting down the shops. And sorry. as I showed, they've been holding all these mass rallies and also protests as well. In fact, last few days, they had thousands of tractors marching through the villages, and they arrived in Delhi a couple of days ago. But Modi has been blaming all these protests upon his found new enemies called the foreign influences or foreign destructive influences. Before he tried to blame the Khalistanis, that's the Sikh separatists, then the Pakistani and Chinese governments. Now this new enemy, since Greta Thunberg tweeted support for the farmers, she did it after Rihanna, the pop superstar, had tweeted support for farmers to her 100 million supporters. But Modi is now taking revenge on the activists in India, because about a month ago, Delhi police flew 1,300 miles to Bangalore to arrest a young climate activist called Disha Ravi, and she was arrested and brought to Delhi, and she spent 5 days in custody. And what was her crime? Because she had tweeted the Greta Thunberg's tweet, which is called the Protester Toolkit. But Disha has been charged with some really serious charges like sedition, which carries a life imprisonment. Now, what was in this toolkit? Was there some secret chemical formula to produce weapons of mass destruction? No, it's just got the normal sort of means how to protest, sort of thing that we do almost daily in everyday life with people around the world. But Modi has gone completely crazy because he wants to shut down all the protests. So he's charged with the sedition because he's saying that he does not want this FDI, foreign destructive influences. What he really wants is a different type of FDI, that is the foreign direct investment. So that's what's all about, foreign direct investments. And luckily, the woman was released after 5 days. And when the judge released her on bail, this is what he said. He said, the offense of sedition cannot be invoked to minister to the wounded vanity of the government. So basically, it's the wounded vanity of a Modi. And so this woman is not the only one. Many other activists have been arrested. Also, many journalists have been put in prison. And also another young woman, her name is Nodeep Kaur. She was kept in prison for 7 weeks, and she claims to have been tortured and sexually assaulted. And she has been also charged with a very serious crime, like even attempted murder. And what was her crime? She had supported a picket line outside a factory where the workers were on strike. And she also supports the farmers. And Modi claims that she had attacked a policeman, but truth is quite opposite. The strikers were attacked brutally by the police, but now she is facing all these made-up charges. And the farmers are still determined. They're united, and there are thousands of them, many thousands of them. There are men and women, young and old. There are Sikhs, Muslims, Hindus, and people of no religion, and also all other faiths. And they're determined to win their demands. They went through a really severe winter when they had to face the thunderstorms and hailstorms, and also their water supply and the electricity has been cut off at times, even the internet and also the telephone services were cut off. Their rubbish is not collected properly. Their toilet facilities are very, very poor, and now they are facing swarms of mosquitoes and a very hot summer. The temperature normally in Delhi rise to 45 and 50 degrees. But they are determined to stay, to have their demands met. But on the 26th of January, there was a bit of wobble because 26th January is the Indian Republic Day. It's an annual holiday, and every year they hold these massive parades, just like in Moscow Red Lion Square. But this year, the farmers have said that they also want to have their own parade, and they had 100,000 tractors because a lot of people had come just for the day. But unfortunately, a small sectarian section, they broke away from the main parade, and they went to this place called the Red Fort, and they raised the Sikh religious flag. And they were able to do that because the police were quite compliant, because the whole object of that exercise was to cause division between Sikhs and Hindus. But once they raised that Sikh religious flag, they were quite brutally attacked by the police, and they arrested more than 150, and one man was killed. But that sectarian action delivered a hammer blow to the movement when it was at right at its height. And so as a result, a lot of people became very, very demoralized because that was the first time the world media reported anything at all about the protests. Even in this country, it was the first time a lot of people saw what was happening in India, which had been happening for 2 months. There was massive protests, but no one knew anything about it. But the other 100,000 tractors with maybe 300,000 or 400,000 people, they were totally ignored. So as a result, there was so much demoralization and people started leaving camps. But then Modi made a real blunder. He sent paramilitary forces to surround the camps, and he also sent hundreds of his BJP and RSS, that's the Hindu fascist party goons, to attack the farmers while the police stood by. And when the farmers fought back, they were brutally attacked by the police. But such is the magic of the social media nowadays that the farmers appealed for help. And I've heard many stories where women told to the men folk, if you don't go back, then we will go, because the women have been at the forefront of these struggles. So overnight, thousands of people came back. And now the camps are back to the normal strength. But how did we get here? First of all, when we talk about the farmers in the West, they normally tend to be hundreds, even thousands of acres of land. But 84% of the Indian farmers have less than 5 acres. And also, 52% of the Indian population is involved in farming, but it adds only 15%, that is 15%, to the GDP. Also, the Indian economy has been in doldrums for quite a while. Even before the pandemic, Indian economy, aligned with many other world economies, was going down. But in the last quarter, it lost 24%. So Modi has some real problems, but he's been trying to resolve these problems by bringing in globalization, neoliberalism, deregulations, and privatizations. And these changes are actually demanded by the international capitalism, by the IMF, by the World Bank, WTO, etc. And because they have lent billions of dollars to Modi and they want their money back. So Modi is complying to their demands. And in the last election, he promised that India would make a quantum leap in investor-friendly reforms. Investor-friendly reforms. So that's what it's all about. In fact, even Joe Biden recently said that he welcomes all these reforms. He just wishes Modi be a little bit gentle towards the farmers. So it's basically demanded by the international capitalism. So how is Modi going about it? First of all, on the industrial side, he's passed 4 new labor codes. And all these were done under the cloud of pandemic, and these laws were rushed through parliament without any much discussion. And these labor codes about raising the working day from 8 hours to 12 hours, raising the working week from 48 hours to 72 hours, and rolling back the health and safety standards, making hiring and firing of workers much easier, and making it much more difficult for the workers to go on strike. So in fact, he has taken the Indian workers' rights back to the 19th century because he wants to turn India into a sort of mass production factory to compete with China. And on the farming side, he has passed 3 new laws. And these laws are basically, the first law is about privatizing the markets. Because at the moment, the farmers sell their produce in the government-controlled markets through the government-appointed agents. They also have what's called minimum support price, MSP, or the guaranteed price for a number of commodities. Also, the companies, the corporations are not allowed to buy too much to stop them hoarding. But Modi wants to do away with all that. And which will mean that all the markets will become a monopoly under control of a couple of these mega agribusinesses, corporations, in the hands of the 2 of the multi-billionaires, Ambani's and Adani's. They are one of the richest men in the world, not just in India, but in the whole world. And so they will control all markets, and they will buy the produce at the lowest possible price, because there will be no guaranteed price. And the second law is about the contract farming. So then the same corporation will go to the farmers and say to them that we are sorry, you're not getting very much price for your produce. Why don't you sell it all to us directly at the farm? So make a contract with us. But then these corporations, they will sell to the farmer, they will tell the farmers what to produce, when to produce. They will also sell their own fertilizers and pesticides at a very high cost. But when it came to the harvest, they would complain about the quality of the produce, as happening around the world in many countries. And in fact, it's been estimated that nearly half of the food in the world is dumped by the farmers, because these retailers, the big corporation, they refuse to buy produce if it's a slightly different shape or different color, etc. So that will happen to the farmers in India as well. But they will have no recourse to justice, because they could only go to the lowest level magistrates' courts. And most of these magistrates tend to be very, very corrupt. So they've been in the pockets of these mega corporations. So farmers will have no power to argue with the corporations. And the third law is about the essential commodities. At the moment, the government buys the surplus at the minimum guaranteed price, then it sells it at a subsidized price. This is the program of removing hunger, basically. They sell at subsidized prices. And Modi wants to do away with all that. And he said that the government will only buy surplus at times of extreme emergencies, like famine or war. So he wants these corporations to buy the surplus, and they're already building massive silos. So they will buy at a very, very low price. Then they'll hoard these commodities, raise the price artificially, then sell them at massive profits. So basically, the farmers are being attacked from all sides. And already the farmers, their incomes have been falling for a long time, because the cost of the fertilizers and the pesticides have been shooting up. So as a result, the farmers have been taking massive loans, being unable to pay back. And every year, scores of farmers commit suicide. The latest figures are available for 2019, when more than 10,000 farmers commit suicide. So basically, it's a life and death matter for the farmers. So that's why on the 26th of November, 250 million workers went on strike to protest against the labor codes which are affecting the workers, and they also in support of the farmers. And on the same day, the 1,000 farmers from Punjab, they marched down to Delhi, as we saw in the video earlier on. And then they were joined by the farmers from the other states, like Haryana and UP, Uttar Pradesh, and various other states. And since
Balwinder, you've got 2 minutes left, Balwinder.
How many?
2.
2, okay, so yeah, okay, I'll finish with that. Right. So that's where they've been protesting for the last 4 months. And so where next? I think it will all depend upon what happens in 2 days' time. But I think at the moment, they basically are, because after the 250 million workers went on strike, the trade unions have done very little, because there are 10 different TUC in India. Like we have only one TUC here. There are 10 different TUC in India. And they align to various political parties. Most of them align to the left party, the 3 communist parties, and Australian Maoists. And they are now basically become like a Labour Party here. They don't believe in mass actions, and they're waiting for the elections. And the whole also seem to that wait for elections. They'll probably hold the balance of power. Then they can get the Congress, if they come to power, to repeal those laws. That seems so. I think we can discuss more in discussion. But basically, as a result, the farmers' leaders also seem to be looking for compromises, and they're sending very mixed signals. Rather than calling for massive actions, massive strikes, and unless the left gets on the board, the trade union movements steps up to the place, call for indefinite general strike. I see at the moment it is very, very difficult. The farmers will win their demands, but that's what's needed. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Balwinder, and very comprehensive account of what's been happening. I think the image of the police officer raising the baton against the protester was very, reminded me of the scenes from Bristol at the weekend. And I just want to remind everybody that the front page of Socialist Worker this week is on that very topic, thugs. But obviously, our next speaker, Touseef Mir, is going to talk about Kashmir today. It's the level of brutality that we're seeing in Kashmir today is something we just don't really know on our streets in Britain. So I'm going to hand over to Touseef now.
Thank you, Wendy. I hope my presentation is properly visible. Is it?
Yes, we can see it. Yes, thank you.
Lovely. So thank you very much. And thanks a lot, Balwinder, for a really powerful presentation. And also thanks ever so much to Norwich Socialist Workers Party for always, at least for the last 3 years, for providing me this opportunity to talk and raise awareness about Kashmir. So again, today marks no exception, and today as well, I'll be talking about Kashmir. So coming straight away to my point for today, for those of us who don't know much about Kashmir, Kashmir is a landlocked region between Central and South Asia. However, in the modern times, it has been shoehorned or dovetailed to the South Asian region in complete or significant oblivion, or should I dare say disregard to its historic, traditional, as well as cultural realities. So talking about Kashmir as a part of South Asia, the conflict of Kashmir has been festering in the region for at least the last 7 decades. And this conflict actually concerns the lives of millions of people, and it's one of the worst military occupations. So today I'll be talking about that. About the region of Kashmir, this erstwhile independent country is currently divided and controlled between 3 nuclear-armed states, or 3 nuclear-armed countries: Pakistan, India, and China, as you can make out from the map itself. So China controls a lesser portion of the territory, which is mostly uninhabited and is called or known as Aksai Chin, whereas India and Pakistan, they control major portions and major inhabited portions of the territory of Kashmir. And they lay competing claims over the sovereignty or territorial sovereignty rights over the entirety of Kashmir. And as a result of this, they've waged two full-fledged wars against each other, and also a near war or a militarized escalation in 1999. It's because of these dynamics that Kashmir is described, or Kashmir is understood as a nuclear flashpoint in the region. And it was in this context that the then President of the United States of America, Bill Clinton, described Kashmir as the most dangerous place in the world. However, what's really important to understand here is that among these, or amidst these competing claims over the territorial sovereignty rights over Kashmir, the voices from Kashmir, especially those of Kashmiris from within and outside, get obfuscated amidst these statist narratives. So my work primarily revolves around underscoring, highlighting, and making prominent some of those voices. So coming straight away to my point for today, as most of us must be knowing that the year 1947 marks the era of decolonization of the Indian subcontinent that led to the creation of two new nation states of India and Pakistan. In the immediate backdrop of this decolonization, there was a popular Quit India movement against the British rule in India. And likewise, Kashmir simultaneously had an equally popular and exuberant movement against the rule of the British-installed monarchy headed by Hari Singh. And this popular movement had become quite disciplined and persistent since at least 1931. And over the time, this popular movement turned into a mass insurrection against Hari Singh. And by the October of 1947, it segued into a popular armed insurrection that was augmented by the tribal Pathans from the neighboring northwestern frontier province, which now is a part of Pakistan. So these turn of events actually compelled Hari Singh to flee for his safety and seek military assistance from the government of India. Now, the Indian state, they promised military help on the condition that Hari Singh signed the instrument of accession, acceding Kashmir to the dominion of India. This instrument of accession in itself is a widely debated topic amongst the popular as well as academic scholarship, where a massive chunk of scholarship actually contests the validity of the instrument of accession. And an equally significant chunk of scholarship, they actually question whether the instrument of accession was signed in the very first place. However, notwithstanding the debate around the instrument of accession, the instrument of accession was in itself conditional. That's why it was provisionally accepted by the then Governor General of India, Lord Mountbatten, and this was to be ratified by a yet to be held popular mandate or a popular referendum. A claim or a call that was unequivocally upheld by the then Prime Minister, or the first Prime Minister of India as well, Jawaharlal Nehru. In his formal communication, one of his formal communications with his counterpart in Pakistan, he was on record. These are the kind of promises they've given to the people in Kashmir, to the United Nations, to the international community, as well as to Pakistan, which again holds one part of Kashmir. And it was that our assurance that we shall withdraw our troops from Kashmir as soon as peace and order is restored and leave the decision regarding the future of the state to the people of the state. It's not merely a promise to your government, but also to the people of Kashmir and to the world. Now, long story short, it's actually the unfulfillment of this promise that's foundational to the contentious politics as well as mass insurrections that Kashmir has witnessed over the last 7 decades, where the people have persistently demanded their right to self-determination and an end to Indian occupation. The response of the Indian state to this has been curbing and controlling authoritatively these mass movements or popular insurrections by predominant use of militaristic and authoritarian means. And some of these non-democratic and authoritarian or repressive means include fraudulent elections that have been happening in Kashmir since 1947, arbitrary installation and removal of client regimes, denial of democracy and institutional decay, and an overall militarized governance. So the time's actually less, so I wouldn't be able to talk about these things in detail. However, excuse me.
Sorry to interrupt.
All right.
Just let you know the building starts at 10:30.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So an overall militarized governance. And as a result of these things, what has happened is that the alienation amongst the Kashmiri people, it escalated, and there was an incremental escalation in the popular resistance against the Indian state or the rule of the Indian state in Kashmir, which led to multiple phases of armed militancy against the Indian rule. The most significant phase of that armed militancy against the Indian rule was the popular armed militancy of late 1980s, where tens of thousands of Kashmiri people rose up in arms against the rule of the Indian state. Again, the response to this by the Indian state was a further escalation and increment in the repressive, non-democratic, and militaristic means to unsuccessfully curb the popular demand or the popular movement for the right to self-determination, which continues till date. This interaction of dynamics of the repressive structures and procedures and the popular resistance has led to a consequence that Kashmir right now is the most densely militarized zone of the world. For a population of 14 million people, there are around 1 million Indian military or armed forces. About the humanitarian toll of it, since 1990s alone, there have been somewhere between 75,000 and 100,000 loss of civilian lives, about 150,000 orphans, 3,000 to 5,000 widows and half widows. Half widows is a particularly very special category where these women don't even know whether they are widowed or their husbands are alive, because their husbands have been disappeared through enforced disappearances in the prisons or custody or after arrest. So they don't know, they are in a dilemma whether their husbands have died or they're still alive, whether they should get married or still wait for their husbands. And there are about 10,000 of such recorded cases of enforced disappearance in Kashmir. The worst blow of this hegemony and military authoritarianism to Kashmir was actually dealt on the 5th of August 2019, when the government of India unilaterally and arbitrarily read down the constitutional provisions giving limited self-autonomy to Kashmir, as well as protecting their domiciliary or residency rights. So they actually dismembered Kashmir into 2 centrally controlled principalities and read down all their constitutional guarantees. So currently what happened, and also after that, Kashmir was put under a strict communication, information, and physical lockdown for 1.5 years, which was then superimposed by the COVID lockdown. So literally, Kashmiri people have been under a severe military, authoritarian, and repressive lockdown since 5th of August 2019. It's about 9 million people under the lockdown, which is way worse than the kind of lockdowns that we see over here, which looks a cakewalk compared to that. And we aren't even able to tolerate that for a month. So we can really imagine the plight of Kashmiris living over there. The current state is that currently there is no elected government and Kashmir is being controlled as a principality through an appointed representative of the central government, who is then supported by his coterie of the bureaucrats.
To see if you've got 4 minutes left.
Oh, was I given 10 minutes or 15 minutes?
15, you've had 11.
All right, so the current state is that Kashmir has been put on a genocide alert by the US-based Genocide Watch. Summing it all up, I'm bringing the title slide in. So this wall actually symbolizes the state of Kashmir, which is decrepit, desolate. So there is water seeping in, which is weakening the walls. The plumbing is broken. The vent in and out of the wall is actually very restricted, closed, and broken in itself. The writing on the wall is muted or invisibilized by a superimposed writing. And that's the reality of Kashmir. There is no freedom of expression. The people can't vent out. The means of expression are absolutely limited and broken by themselves. There is repressive control on almost everything. And the message that comes out from Kashmir, it is superimposed by the statist narratives, so much so that the world doesn't know the reality of what's happening in Kashmir. And this is a trope that is followed everywhere. And for those of us who would be curious to understand what the real image was, it's 8 lakh, which is 800,000 Indian uniformed terrorists versus defenseless Kashmiris. And such writings are everywhere in Kashmir. For example, we can see that it's a hospital, and this is the obfuscation. And people, it's the inside of one of the major hospitals in Kashmir, Go India, Go Back, and this has been actually superimposed, which is actually a topic in itself. I don't want to use graphic details because they would be very violent. So this gives us an understanding that not even the writings on the wall are tolerated by the Indian state. We can really imagine the predicament of the people living in Kashmir who would voice their opinion. So right now, there's no freedom of expression, no freedom, no dignity to life available to the Kashmiri people. So the expression of Sami Mari about the experience of Palestinians living under repressive Israeli military rule, it actually resonates and becomes quite apt about the predicament of Kashmiris, which is emotionally wounded, socially rural, politically lost, economically poverty-stricken, and nationally hurt. So there were some statistics which I wouldn't read because the time's quite less, but then Kashmir has the world's first mass blinding campaign. And the youngest victim of that is 18 months old Heba. And this shows that 41% of the adult population, it's a report by Medicine Sans Frontiers, that 41% of the adult population are under clinical depression, and about 771,000 people in Kashmir are suffering from PTSD. And it's from 2015. And since then, the repression has increased manifold. It would be way beyond that. So this is the mass blinding campaign. These are young children who've been blinded by the pellets that are fired by Indian state. So that's the least violent graphic that I could share with you people. That's Heba on the left corner, 18 months old. So people sitting within their homes are actually blinded. That's the predicament of Kashmiris right now. So after 5th of August, what's actually unleashed was this military repressive occupation. It was imbued and imbricated by very significant and loud overtones of settler colonialism that rests on 4 basic pillars, which is demographic change, industrial occupation, eco-terrorism, and curbs on the freedom of expression. Demographic change, up to now, Kashmiris have no exclusive right on the land, and up to 25th of January, about 3.4 million domicile certificates have been given to Indians to settle down in Kashmir, 3.4 million for 14 million to dilute the population, which is like the Israeli tactics. There are now settler colonies, the police, the armed forces, the Kashmiri Hindu colonies, separate colonies that are being built. Apart from that, the Kashmiris who fled between 1947 and 1954, who fled the persecution of India and ran away to Kashmir, Pakistan, they are now denied the right to settle back into Kashmir, whereas any Indian can settle in Kashmir. And if a revenue official denies a domicile certificate within 15 days to an Indian, they will be fined 50,000 Indian rupees. This shows the level of expediency about the demographic dilution that India is trying to do in Kashmir. Apart from that, the Indian state can categorize now any area as a strategic area in Kashmir, which they can control. So they can have direct control over the population. So it gives them rights to make cantonments in even civilian populated areas. Industrial occupation, it's just like they're extracting, mining, forests are being cleared. In one village, that is Kandijan, about 10,000 trees were felled in just 2 days. Apart from that, about 75,000 hectares of land have been given permission to be cleared off for Indian industrial projects where Kashmiris have no role. So this actually relates back to eco-terrorism. And about the curbs on freedom, after 5th of August 2019, about 13,000 people were arrested. They were activists, political activists, journalists, traders in Kashmir. And in that, about 5,000 of them were young, minor Kashmiri boys and girls. About journalism, like anyone who tries to write about these things, they are booked under draconian laws like Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. The civil society activists who try to raise their voices against that, they are being hounded and terrorized by central agencies like National Investigation Agency. So it's a full-fledged settler colonialism that's being unleashed in Kashmir, which was actually leaked through a video of the Indian Consul General in USA, whose video got leaked, where they openly admitted that they are on an agenda of settler colonialism in Kashmir. I'd like to end with that. Thanks a lot for your time and patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Touseef. And I know it's very brave to speak out about Kashmir, and everybody's applauding you silently. We know that the risk of speaking out for people who still have family back in Kashmir is not just, no, not risking just imprisonment, but is risking potential loss of life. So it's very brave of you to speak out and to continue to speak out. We would like now, I think, to have some questions. I've stopped recording, so you can speak without fear of being broadcast on our YouTube channel. So please raise your hands using the blue button, the raise hand option, and we will take short questions, and then we'll give both our speakers a chance to come back. If you want to direct your question at a particular speaker, that's fine. And maybe 4 or 5 questions, then responses to those. And then if we've got time, we'll have a more general discussion. So I can see that Stephen's got his hand up, so I'm going to ask you to unmute. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both speakers. That was very enlightening, both their presentations. Two quick questions, one which is probably not very easy to answer, and one which I hope is very easy to answer. First one is, do we think that there is any way in which the mass uprisings that happened recently in India can be a way or can connect with other political forms to make a difference in Kashmir, even just in the overall political atmosphere in India, to put pressure on what is going on in Kashmir? Is there any linkage between these two things that are possible? That's the first one, which is maybe more complicated. But the second one is, and in particular to Touseef, is there a particular 1-volume book that I can read, or anybody else on this meeting can read, about Kashmir, about its history, its political history? Because I don't seem to be able to find one, and I think it is so important to try and disseminate that information. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So next I've got Keith, followed by Tim.
Hello. Right. Yeah. A question for Balwinder on food production. Obviously, it would appear that Modi's government could try and starve the farmers out of their camps, but who is actually producing food? Is it possible that the farmers could starve the government into submission? So who's actually producing the what is the food production situation at the moment in India? And quickly, another one, what is the sort of reaction from say transport and railway workers?
Good questions. Thanks, Keith. Tim is next, and anybody else wants to raise their hand, follow Tim, please do so.
Thank you very much to Balwinder and to Steve.
Can you speak up, Tim? You're a bit quiet.
Yep. I'll speak. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Excellent. I've got a question for Balwinder and Touseef, which is it's about food production and farmers. I guess the big question is, how can the farmers win? But the other question is, 70% of all our food in the world is produced by small farmers. That's according to the UN and the National Geographic, with less than 25 hectares of land, and they're often more productive, they're better for the environment, and they often produce more healthier food. My question is, why is that? Why is big agribusiness so bad for farming, and how come, despite these big agribusinesses being so productive in inverted commas, how come small farmers are so much better, and why don't we just let small farmers get on and do what they're doing and help them, rather than the market crushing them down? That's my question. And in a different kind of society, how could we reorganize farming to be much better than it is at the moment? Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I think we'll go back to the speakers. I've just got my own question to chuck in. What can we do here in the UK to help? So I'm going to ask Balwinder to speak first. Oops, I don't know what I've done there. Can you unmute yourself, Balwinder? And then Touseef, and then we'll come back and see if there's more discussion.
Yes, thank you. Okay, yeah. First of all, yes. Is there any link? Are they linking up with the Modi was trying to divide, on the question of religion? Hindus turning Hindus against Muslims, Sikhs against Hindus, etc. and they have now come together in many places in a big way. As farmers, they're united. But initially, their slogans were victory to the farmers and victory to soldiers. And they didn't mean that in the Russian Revolution sense. They meant those soldiers who are sitting at the borders with Pakistan and China, because a lot of these farmers' sons are in the army as well. But now the slogans have changed to victory to the farmers and victory to the workers, and unity between the farmers and the workers. So that is quite a bit of progress. There was some talk initially for the farmers to take on the issue of the CAA, as that's the Citizen Amendment Act, where the Modi had passed these laws last year, denying citizenship to any Muslims coming from the neighboring countries as refugees, asylum seekers, and only allowing to the Hindus and Sikhs, basically making a religion, codifying religion as part of the act, the Indian Constitution, but nothing really came up for that. But will they support struggles in Kashmir? I think at the moment it's a bit early. But whenever people are struggling, no matter what, and they come together, unite together, it is especially the winning, it can be a big progress. If they do win the struggles, I'm sure they will carry on further into other, linking up with other struggles as well, especially when a lot of the Muslims farmers taking part. And that's one of the things, the Muslims position has been raised quite a bit since they come out in sport, and then they're supporting the farmers. How they are surviving. First of all, because they chose a time when they had sown their crops, and so it was a good time for them to come and protest. And unfortunately, now the harvest time is coming soon, and that's exactly what Modi is banking on. He thinks that in but a few weeks' time, they will have to go back to the villages, although farmers saying that they cannot cope, the neighbors will do the harvest for the people who are sitting at the camps. Let's wait and see. I think end result will be a lot of them will start leaving the farms. The second thing is banking on is the really hot summer, and also he's hoping that maybe the coronavirus will spread in the camps, and even cholera. There's a real danger that cholera will spread. So Modi at the moment is banking on those things, and so that's why he's not backing down. And although in the very beginning he did get quite rattled, he offered a lot of compromises. They held 11 talks in which basically he was trying to give them almost everything except repealing the laws. He was make law amendments. He'd also offered to suspend the laws for 18 months, but now he's stuck his heels in because he knows that if the farmers don't really do something really fantastic, he can probably, survive. Food, yes, 70% of the food is produced by the small farmers, and basically because they are more productive. They have a variety of food, a diversity of food, whereas the big agribusiness, they basically produce mass quantities of very poor food quality with a lot of fertilizers, a lot of pesticides, and a lot of people around the world are beginning to reject that. I think that's one reason why the small farmers are much more successful. What can we do in this country? Well, basically, people can help in also different ways. You can pass resolutions in the trade unions, in your organizations, and send them the resolution support. Also, there were some protests in the past in this country. If they happen again, people can take part in those. So there are a number of ways we can help them. And what will happen in the future, I think I'll come back to later on. Oh, thank you.
Okay, should I come in?
Yes, please, Touseef, over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. So I think Balwinder actually answered most of the questions quite aptly. So wherever I have a different thing to add. I'll add that. So about like, I'm a person who believes in transnational solidarities, as in when we talk about what can the other people do. But then when it comes to India, as Balwinder also was not very confident about that. So Kashmir actually has been fetishized in such a way that killing a Kashmiri becomes national service. Kashmiris aren't given hotel accommodations in India. They are targeted. So for Kashmiris, at least from my personal experience or whatever has been happening, we have no expectations from anyone in India. There is a very minuscule minority, but then the kind of repression. And as soon as somebody starts talking about Kashmiri, their nationalist credentials are actually questioned. So, for example, for this massive lockdown and this massive carnage of Kashmiris that has been happening, there has been not even a single voice from India which has been entertained. So, no expectations from anyone in India till the time they don't get their house right. They wouldn't be able to make a change. And like Kashmiris, like the Indian people have been conditioned in such a way through these media narratives, through this media hegemony, that where Kashmir has become a place where whatever you do against the Kashmiris, that becomes national service. For example, the reading down of this autonomy and this lockdown that was imposed on Kashmiris, 2 years down the line, 9 million people living in their homes, not being allowed to move out or work. My family suffered, our business got lost, so many people died. There is a rising incidence of cardiac arrest related deaths among youth. Every day, a person or two die because of cardiac arrest. That's the level of trauma Kashmiris have. And this thing has been celebrated in India as victory because now they have mainstreamed Kashmir. That's what mainstreaming for them is. And there was no voice in the parliament, in the civil society. Nobody talks about that. So hopes, really, I'll be honest, truth be told, no hopes from Indian people. There needs to be a mental revolution first, then maybe something good happens. About books, there are a number of books that I could suggest about Kashmir. If we talk about history, I'd suggest Alastair Lamb is a good read. Apart from that, if we have to understand what the level of occupation and on how many levels this occupation impacts people, there is a academic writing that came out in 2018. It's called Resisting Occupation. It's a wonderful collection, so it might be very helpful. Apart from that, I also work on these things. Maybe in a year's time, hopefully my book should be out. So I have devoted a big chapter on the continuum of this conflict, the violent and non-violent phases. Maybe that also becomes helpful, but not sure yet how long that's going to take. About the last thing, what we can do, again, it links back to the first question, transnational solidarity, raising awareness and making our government accountable. For example, I think this is a direct moral and political responsibility of the British government. We were sold for 7.5 million local currency in 1846, along with our trees, animals, and people, to this British installed monarch, Hari Singh's great-grandfather. And then after they left, we were divided and they didn't intervene. So it's a doing, I think, it's a doing of the British legacy. So without actually sorting us out, they left. And for example, day before yesterday, United Kingdom, it headed the group of the countries, about 21 countries, that passed a resolution in the United Nations Human Rights Council on war crimes against Sri Lanka, about the war crimes they did against Tamils during the civil war. You equally, like Kashmir and India and Pakistan, it was your colony, like Sri Lanka was a colony. Why are you silent when it comes to Kashmir? Why do you sell your arms when it comes to Kashmir? Why do you have to sell your arms to India? Or like the relations, why does economics prevail to the humanitarian toll or the humanitarian crises that's prevalent in Kashmir? So I think if we raise awareness about these things and pressure the government, maybe that's one thing that we can do. That's what's in our hands. Yeah. So Keith raised a very important point about these great games that have been happening around the world. For example, the Russian bloc and the US bloc up to the end of Cold War and its impact on what happened to the conflict in Kashmir. So they had a massive influence on that. For instance, thrice Kashmir was taken up in the United Nations Security Council for a resolution on the referendum, and the veto, it was practiced by Russia because Russia was on the side of India those days. So that's what actually stalled. Right now also, because India is a massive market, none of the countries actually want to upset India. That's why all these massive injustices and exploitations that are happening in Kashmir and elsewhere in India, for example, the Northeast regions, or even against the minorities, Christians, Sikhs, Dalits, or Muslims. So they're always brushed under the carpet. There is this ostrich behavior. They're closing their eyes to these things because they do not want to upset a big market, which actually functions as one of their main economy generators. So that's one of the reasons. So international players definitely have a massive impact and role in what's happening in these local wars. For example, talk about Yemen, talk about what's happening in Bolivia, or Latin American countries, talk about what's happening in Africa, this tussle between China and USA. Likewise, Kashmir's also like grinding between these two massive stones. The other thing about the environmental disaster that's happening in Kashmir, Kashmir is an eco-fragile region, and the brazen entry or brazen approvals that are being given to Indian industries in Kashmir, it's massive and it's really horrifying. During the lockdown, about 275 projects without forest clearance, without ecological clearance, were approved by the government of India, which would clear about 275 hectares of forest land. NHPC, which is the National Hydropower Project Corporation of India, 40% of its electricity comes from Kashmir. They draw 40% of its electricity from Kashmir. In 10 years, they earned 194 billion Indian rupees from that electricity. And the dividends that they're giving to Kashmiris is actually peanuts. It's a 12% royalty, and I do not know after 5th of August what's the reality. Likewise, they are actually dislocating about 68,000 tribal dwellers from the mountains and forest areas, which are actually protecting the forest. And they are dislocating them so much so that United Nations Environmental Program had to intervene and issue statements in that regard. So what's happening in Kashmir is like they are trying to exploit and squeeze as much as they can. They're draining the resources, they're draining the wealth from Kashmir. So much so that even if a resolution or solution to Kashmir problem happens, they've already drained it enough to like keep it as a desert and whosoever it goes to them. Yeah, so the problem in Kashmir is massive. And yes, definitely we need to raise awareness and we need to rise up to the occasion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Touseef. Balwinder, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I think the environmental destruction, I think the comrades already answered quite a bit. I'd just like to add that if Modi gets away with the taking away the land from the poor farmers and handing it over to the big corporations, that problem will get even far, far worse. And also, as I said, he wants to turn India into a mass production factory for the world to compete with China. And that would have a really tremendous detrimental effect on the environment. So those things are likely to happen. Do the outside powers want to sell weapons to India, Pakistan? Of course, I think they love to sell weapons. They love any conflict around the world, so they can sell weapons. That's always their aim. But I think the problem between India, Pakistan, Kashmir is that they all originated with the British Empire's divide and rule policies, because they ruled over India for 200 years. At the maximum, they had only 30,000 people, British people in India, 30,000. They managed to rule over 400 million Indians. How? By divide and rule. They turned Sikhs against Hindus, against Muslims, and every other division they found, they turned people against each other. In fact, the partition was the result of their divide and rule policies. If there had been no partition, they wouldn't have all these problems, Kashmir, etc. So basically, that's where all the problems lie, at the divisive methods used by the British. But since then, they were countries were taken by the ruling classes, who followed on their similar pattern. So they're using the same methods of divide and rule now. And so what is the solution? Basically, at the moment, farmers done their best. We cannot expect any more from the farmers. They have spent 4 months protesting really hard. More than 250 of them died because of the exposure or the underlying disease, and some accidents, and some even have unfortunately committed suicides, and they have suffered enough. But Modi is banking on them basically giving up because of the various issues mentioned before, the disease and heat and just getting tired. Well, I think although they are quite determined, it really now depends on the workers, the trade unions. Unfortunately, trade unions in India are under the control of these Stalinist Maoists, and they basically have given up any idea of revolutionary change. They all now are interested only in elections. There are elections taking place in 5 states in the next month or so. So they're all just busy in those elections, and they have not even mentioned anything what the farmers are going to do in 2 days' time. None of those communist parties have mentioned anything at all. And it doesn't look like the workers will be coming out on strike on the day. In fact, there are 3 different protests going on in parallel. There were massive protests against the price rise in fuel, in diesel, petrol, and cooking gas, mainly by the city people, because they are affected most. And there was no connection between those protests and the farmers' protests or the workers. Also, the trade unions had called for one-day protests about a month ago, and they never linked them with the farmers' strike. So there are 3 different sort of protests going in parallel without much linking between them. Basically, because the trade union leaders do not realize that they have to take the lead in these protests, and they're relying on these elections. The farmers do not have the real power to make changes. And Modi has resisted that, and he can maybe keep on resisting. It's only workers who have the power, because when the workers go on strike, that's when they really hit the capitalists where it hurts in the pockets. And unfortunately, they're waiting for the elections, which are not until 3 years away. Even the policy that they will hold a balance of power, then they can get the Congress to pass or repeal these laws, which the Congress have already promised. But the thing is, when Congress was in power, they were also thinking of bringing in similar laws. In fact, a few weeks ago, Modi stood in the parliament and he said to the Congress Prime Minister, who was in power at the time, he said he was thinking about these laws, but I have done it. And this poor man sat there with his face looking really gloomy. So that's what it is. Even if the Congress does repeal those laws, it'll bring in similar laws, because those laws are in fact demanded by the international capitalist system. And India has borrowed a lot of money. It's also, as our comrade said, it's trying to incorporate itself into the international economy. And it wants to have these multinational corporations to come in. As I said, they passed all these investor-friendly reforms. So that is what it's all about, international capitalism taking over. So into the result is the working class, Indian working class, especially. I think it's time for the rank and file workers to come forward. And because the trade union leaders won't do anything, it's the rank and file workers that come forward. They have to take initiative. They have to call for mass action. If the Indian workers can win India, similarly, they can also, the workers in Kashmir and Pakistan can win. It's the working class, really. It's not the ruling class. It doesn't matter if Kashmir, even if Kashmir wins independence, there will be similar ruling class in Kashmir. That will be just as bad as Indian ruling class, or the Pakistan ruling class. What we really need is the workers in all those countries coming together, united together, overthrowing all their ruling classes. That will be the answer. Thank you.